America is back. America is back.
America is back.
Something some Americans believed in 2021 when President Biden said it, and others believe when President Trump said it this year. There's a new Fox poll out about national pride. Overall, 58% of Americans say they're proud of their country. That's 13 points higher than last year, and the highest since the first time we asked the question in 2011, when it was 69%. The pride now comes largely from Republicans, at 85%. They were at 36% last summer when President Biden was in office. Back then, 55% of Democrats said they were proud of America. They're at 36% now, with about 4 in 10 independents expressing pride both then and now. A new Gallup poll finds the same as the Fox poll. 58% of Americans overall are very or extremely proud of their country.
One of the things that I think is interesting, you go back to 2002 in the Gallup poll, and you had a 91% number of people who were proud to be American.
Martha MacCallum is the anchor and executive editor of The Story with Martha MacCallum, weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern on Fox News Channel. Her podcast is called The Untold Story.
So I think what we're seeing is if your team is in, if your team is a winner in the presidential race, you feel good about the country. If your team is a loser, you feel bad about the country. And I think it's sad. I think that we used to have a sense in this country, certainly when I was growing up and going through college and all of that, it was that, everybody was proud to be an American. But, sometimes your side won and sometimes your side lost. And I think that, President Trump is a very big factor here, but it's not the whole story. And I think you see a number of underlying factors that are leading to what these numbers are revealing.
I mean, one part of it's generational. In the Gallup poll especially, there's almost a direct correlation between age and pride. And people under whatever late 20s and younger, it's less than half say that they're very proud or extremely proud. And as you go up in the generations, people have more so. So something's clearly going on there.
Absolutely. And I think you have to look to the education system, which unfortunately over the past few decades has decided that it's going to indoctrinate even young children with their thinking on politics and on the country. And I think that has deteriorated the overall sense of pride. I also think, I spend a lot of my time outside of work interviewing veterans from our wars, from Vietnam and from most recently Vietnam and from World War II, of course. And I've done some recent pieces on Korea as well. And I think that, there's a lack of understanding of the history of our country, the sacrifices that have been made by so many people. And I thought it was very interesting in the upper age group for this, that number of American pride is also declining. And I don't know about you, but if you speak to, I spoke to my dad about this when he was in his 90s. They are worried about the country, older individuals, and they see what's happening. They see kids who don't even know, what the Civil War was or don't understand what happened in Vietnam. Until we start really teaching kids our history, I think we're going to see these numbers continue to slide when when everything comes from TikTok and social media and you've got a 20-second lesson on something. They're just buying into it. They're not, a lot of them, sadly, digging much deeper than that. So this is a huge problem in the country, and I think that's what's reflected in these numbers, maybe more than anything.
That's one thing we were talking about when we were kicking the idea for this segment around and brainstorming on it was not just the attention span part of it, but just the constant negativity of the doom scrolling when you're looking at social media could be a contributing factor.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. I'm not sure how much more we need to understand about TikTok than the fact that the Chinese government doesn't allow their young people to use it. And instead, they're fed, and we don't live in this kind of government, thankfully, in a communist leadership, but they're just fed information about communist China, about the great points about China, and math and science. I mean, we have given up a lot of our responsibility, I would say, to teach young people why should you love America? The story of this country. I'm working on a very big project right now, which I hope is going to just do a small part in helping our young people to understand our history. And I think it does change them when they know these stories. I do see kids, I covered the anniversary of Normandy for the 75th anniversary, then the 80th anniversary. And there are families there, American families, who brought their kids for these events. And those kids, they understand the importance of Normandy. They understand Eisenhower. They understand World War II, only because their parents took the time to make sure that they took them to these places and explained it to them. We have Civil War sites, obviously, in this country that can be visited over this summer. People can go to Gettysburg, go to the Memorial Day Parade, which is past now, go to the 4th of July Parade, talk about the country in a positive way, regardless of your politics, because we are all blessed to live in this country, whether you are a Democrat or an independent or a Republican. And I think these numbers need to be given some serious reflection in what we're spending time with our kids on.
Even people who are proud of the idea of America may not like who runs it. And this is pretty consistent in the Fox poll. Over, I think, a third of people-ish trust the federal government compared to two-thirds who distrust it. We've been asking this question since 2002, which was the only time a majority trusted the government, and that was like 9 months after the 9/11 attacks when we were not long into the war in Afghanistan. So that is something that's pretty consistent, whoever's in power, across parties, just a lack of trust in federal government.
And I think that breakdown, we've seen it in our intelligence agencies. We've seen it in the military to some extent, although they tend to be the strongest number in most of these polls. We see it on the court system that people don't trust. And one of the things that I see time and time again is when something does go wrong, or when there's a failure on the part of these agencies or these departments, no one ever stands up and says, we made a mistake in this instance, and we are going to work to fix it. It's always excuses. It's always deflection. It's always, why am I being attacked? Instead of just, I think people really do respond when their government agencies say, we see what's happening. We see the waste in this agency, and we're going to fix it. We're going to make sure we use your tax dollars well. And I think that there's lots of good reasons, sadly, that people have lost their confidence in federal agencies and the government. They've become extraordinarily self-serving, and they've gobbled up a lot of our tax dollars, and people don't feel like they're getting their money's worth from it. So I think that dissatisfaction is real. I honestly don't know if it's recoverable, but I think we need to see. I think DOJ was obviously the Musk-Trump relationship is not in a great place, especially given what we heard from the president this morning on it. But the motivation was correct. And I think that if people see that desire that DOJ had is followed up on, I think that's the only thing in my eyes that can start to rebuild trust in these agencies and departments.
And the generational part of it, that is just economics and personal interest. Younger Americans are having fewer kids. They're not getting married. They can't imagine ever buying a home. And that has to play a factor in pride in your country, no matter which country you're in.
Yeah, people have to know that there's an ability to get ahead and to achieve the American dream. And I understand those concerns. We live in the New York and New Jersey area. It's really tough for a young couple to buy their first home. And, this is why you're seeing Mamdani, I think, get traction in New York, because a lot of them are not digging down to that next layer. They're not really paying attention to the, socialism comments, or even the comments that basically define communism in terms of, garnering and controlling the means of production. That's a very clear communist sentiment that has come from him. But when you say, look, we're going to, free buses, and we're going to basically control your rent, I understand the appeal of that. And I think people are having a hard time getting ahead. But the other thing I will say is that, when you look back in the course of our history, young people, they got married and they had kids, and they scraped by on what they had, and they were building something for their future. I do think that there's a tendency on the part of some young people to say, well, I have to have this first, I have to have that first before I can do all that, before I can settle down. And I just think it's a very different mentality than what we saw from the people who built this country. I mean, look at the people who, literally loaded up their wagon with, 5 children and went west. They had nothing, but they weren't saying, well, I'm not going to get married, or I'm not going to have children. They knew that having, generational aspiration was foundational to achieving that dream. And I think that personal, sacrifice or coming up with a different route is not the way of some young people, and I think this is regional too, so I don't want to, paint a broad brush on the country. We have a lot of amazing young people who are doing exactly this. And one other thing I would say on it is that I do think that faith plays a big part in that kind of trust in the future and ability to get married and have kids and all of that. And I do see that faith is growing in the country, and it is growing among young people, which I think is very encouraging.
Yeah, there's obviously always been, thinking about people on, wagon trains, there's always been struggle, there's always been poverty, there's always been obviously political differences, sometimes violent political differences, but there was, I do think there was more of a sense of we're all rowing in the same direction. We're all rowing in something together. 4th of July is coming up, a time when a lot of people who may not ever think about patriotism, do bust out the red, white, and blue. You a big 4th of July celebrator? Yes,
I'm a big 4th of July celebrator. I love parades, and I love what they recognize about the country. I would encourage people across the country to find your local parade. It does get kids excited about the country. They love to wave flags and, put streamers in their bikes and ride around. And it is a very old-fashioned feel when you go to a 4th of July parade. And so I would really encourage people to get up in the morning and go do that with their family. I just think it's a great way to celebrate the day and to remind people what it's all about. I also would say that, a dose of understanding, I think 1776 is a really good movie. I love when my kids were little, we always showed them these kind of movies just to get them talking about history and talking about the country and, teaching them lessons, honestly, of history that they weren't necessarily getting at school. So I would recommend that too, especially if you get a rainy day.
Martha MacCallum, anchor and executive editor of The Story, weekdays 3 p.m. Eastern on Fox News Channel. Podcast, The Untold Story. Martha, thanks.
Thank you. Take care.